I feel very called to become a member of the Catholic Church.
Love the Catholic Church. It's just the best place to be.
From the studios of EWTN, this is Open Line. In North America, call toll-free 1-833-288-EWTN. That's 1-833-288-3986. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985. You can also text the letters EWTN to 55000 or send an email to openline@ewtn.com.
And we welcome you to EWTN's Open Line Friday. And if it's Friday, then that means we have got America's favorite theologian in the house, Colin Donovan. Yay!
Oh, thank you.
I'm Tom Price. I'm filling in for Jack, who is probably on his way to Memphis at this point, doing some network business there, I believe. So that's a wonderful thing.
He's a traveling man, isn't he?
He is a traveling man. He's all over the place, and we'll be traveling to Lourdes and Fatima coming up in the next 30 days, I believe.
Well, I don't think we have radio stations there.
Working on it. Yep, working on it. So here we are on Open Line Friday, and we're delighted to have you along for the ride as well. As you heard Tom Gray say at the opening there, we have an open line for you right now, and the phone number is 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. If you have a question for Colin Donovan regarding teachings of the church, ins and outs of the Catholic faith, what's shaking in Rome, he is your guy. 833-288-EWTN. So we're going to begin here with an email as we're getting some of these calls screened. This is from John. He says, propitiation is defined as the appeasement of God. Romans 3:25 and many other verses clearly teach that Christ's atonement was a propitiation. Propitiation. There we go. Yeah. Now, given that, where does the Catholic Church find the need for reparation for those who are saved? Doesn't the idea of reparations imply that Christ's atonement was insufficient? Also, how can a mere sinful human do anything that would be reparation for an offense against an all-holy God? Thanks in advance, John.
Sure, yeah. Well, the guarantee we have of that is the words of sacred Scripture, where St. Paul says that I make up what is lacking in the sufferings of Christ. Whoa, wait a minute. He used almost the same phrase the Catholic Church uses. What's wrong with that, Paul? He didn't get the memo, I guess.
Apparently.
And why does he do it? For the sake of his body, the church. Our union with Christ through grace, through baptism, justification, is so profound that we enter into his act of redemption, totally and completely sufficient in himself, but by the will of the Father, and we would say of the Son and the Holy Spirit as well, we have the tremendous honor to participate in that. Now, we don't say God doesn't need the parents to teach the faith to their children, or that you don't need a priest or a pastor or whatever your church calls your minister to preach the gospel, to give the sermons, to do whatever it is they do. It's clear that we accept that people act instrumentally for Christ, and they accomplish what Christ intended. We have that principle in the church, in particular, when we say that the priest or the bishop, who is a priest, acts in the person of Christ, in persona Christi Capitis, in the person of Christ the head. In other words, he doesn't have an independent authority or an independent claim on the fruits of the redemption, but acting in Christ's name and for him as a sign of Christ, the head of that mystical body, the head of the church. He does certain things. He baptizes, confirms, celebrates the Eucharist, absolves from sin, anoints the dying, ordains, and so on, depending, of course, on whether a bishop or a priest. And they do all of these things because they are being used as instruments in the hands of Christ to carry out that work of the redemption. And in the same way, we can offer our sufferings and prayers for others, and in the communion of the saints, we can work with Christ, and because he is working within us through grace, to be effective evangelizers, even of baptism and emergency baptism and so on. Mm-hmm. Now, in the particular case of the suffering and the value of that, once again, it's not that there's this independent sufficiency of our suffering that we can just sort of add up all good Christian suffering of all the ages and say, aha, we've done everything that Christ could do. We wouldn't need Christ. No, we would need Christ because Christ did it all, and we just insert ourselves into that by taking upon ourselves that same mantle and say, I wish to offer this for the sake of your body, the church, for the sake of extending the gospel, for the sake of getting the sinful souls to return to you, and to do all of these things. And so throughout history, many saints have offered themselves to God for that purpose, not because Christ didn't do it all, but because not only did he do it all, but he allows them to share his crown of glory by participating in his suffering in the same way as the book of Revelation shows that he is there in glory as king, surrounded by ministers of both the Old and the New Testament, the patriarchs and the apostles, representing the just souls who work towards the kingdom of God here on earth.
Okay. Appreciate that, and thank you so much for your question. This is Open Line Friday here on EWTN. Lines are starting to fill up. If you have a question for Colin Donovan, the number is 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Just got a text from Ashley who says, what does Mark 6:48 mean when it says, quote, he meant to walk by them? Why would Jesus walk by the disciples upon seeing them struggling to row against the wind?
I don't know. That's
Wow.
a good. I think in all the years on Open Live, I've never heard that exact question. Have you?
No, that's a new one.
I think perhaps to test them, to test their faith.
Okay.
Also to invigorate their faith. If you had seen Christ walking by you on the waters, I think you would have been
Definitely
impressed.
get your attention.
It would get your attention.
Okay.
But there must have been an interior prayer in the hearts of those men, save us, we're sinking.
Yeah, absolutely.
Of course, he was sleeping in that particular case. But.
Yeah. Ashley, thank you so much for your text. Here's one now from Robert. He says, I am Catholic, but I never received my first communion. I married a Catholic woman also, but we were married in a Protestant church. So can I still receive my first communion? Thanks and God bless, Robert.
I think you should take the details of all of that. If you are validly married, then absolutely. If you're not yet into a valid marriage, obviously, then you're not in the situation, a public situation in which you could bring yourself forward for receiving Holy Communion.
Right.
You would need to get that marriage recognized by the church as being valid, and if you were both first married individuals, that's a rather easy process. So again, it's something to take to your pastor, and he'll direct you to those who can help you satisfy that longing and that desire, and I hope you're able to do it.
Yeah, sounds good. Appreciate that. This is EWTN's Open Line Friday. Our phone number 833-288-EWTN. We have 3 lines open right now. In a moment here, we'll be getting to Sue and Marilyn and several more here on the program. First of all, let's get this question from Mimi in Monroe, New York. She says, good day. Can a Roman Catholic priest perform a wedding at the reception place? Or would you need an authorization from your bishop to make that valid? Thanks, Mimi.
For validity, no. It would be a question of lyceity or lawfulness, precisely because the church considers forming a marriage a sacred act. So it's really not fitting to be married in simply a secular place. But you can imagine 2 people who are engaged, and let's say one of them is in a sick bed, and they want to solemnize the marriage before the one in some cases this has happened, passes away. Obviously, you could do the marriage in the hospital room. But there's a case of necessity.
Yeah.
By what necessity could one say that, well, we'd rather have it in the reception hall than in the church, so, I don't think you're going to get permission for that in probably 99.99% of cases.
And the church has a good reason for saying, if you're going to get married as a Catholic, you need to be doing that in a Catholic church, right?
Well, in the case of two Catholics, certainly because you can have a nuptial mass and you can receive Holy Communion, you would wonder the difficulty, let's say, if you wanted a mass in that setting, the logistical difficulties. Putting on family celebrations, I can give you in intimate detail the logistical difficulties of doing the liturgy in secular places by the necessity of a large crowd.
Oh,
and
baby.
So on. So it's
I remember being an extraordinary minister in a case like that, and here comes the mob. I'm like, oh boy.
yeah.
I need
It's
a traffic
daunting at
cop.
times. It's daunting.
In a moment here, we'll be talking with Sue. We'll also be talking with Marilyn in Fort Wayne, Indiana. We've got, looks like full lines right now. When one becomes available, give us a call, 833-288-EWTN, if you have a question for America's favorite theologian, Colin Donovan, 833-288-3986. It is Open Line Friday here on EWTN. Do stay with us. Hey, we're reminding you to check out EWTN Bookmark with Doug Keck tomorrow afternoon. Father Matthew Mary will be along to talk about the new book, Father Leo Clifford's Reflections. If you've listened to EWTN radio for any length of time or watched TV, you're very familiar with Father Leo Clifford of happy memory. He did those wonderful, about 8-minute reflections. We aired them on the radio for a long time.
Extremely popular.
And they're so good, and they're so timeless. You know, it's like listening to Mother Angelica. This stuff just does not get old.
Nope.
And so now EWTN Publishing has accumulated a whole bunch of these, put them between the book covers there, and Father Matthew Mary is going to be along to talk about Father Leo Clifford's Reflections. So do check it out. That's tomorrow afternoon at 2:30 p.m. Eastern right here, and that'll actually be on EWTN television. And we'll air that for you on the radio later on in the weekend. If you're ready now, let's get to the phones at 833-288-EWTN. We begin with Sue listening on Sirius XM 130. Hey, Sue, what's on your mind today?
Hi, thank you. I have a concern about annulments. I'm done with RCIA, and I'm in the middle of my annulment process. And I'm kind of curious about the uniformity, like church-wide. I kind of feel like I'm just on somebody's in basket at the tribunal. And when I have questions, I feel that the responses are very scripted and not really tailored to me. And I almost feel like, some charge, some don't. And now I'm almost to the point where I feel like I'm having to pay to join the faith. And I know it's not that simple, but I just don't feel comfortable with the process, but it's not enough to turn me away from entering the faith. So I'm just really lost and confused.
Well, of course, dioceses are various sizes and have various degrees of staffing. I don't, not being a canonist and not being in that business, so to speak, I don't know what I know that Birmingham, for example, I have a little booklet I acquired a number of years ago that sort of gives examples of the process and what to do in different cases and that. So clearly an effort locally here to have a sort of a standardized guide, especially for the parish priest who isn't normally in tune to all of these kinds of canonical details and so on. And I'm guessing that that's true probably in most, if not all, places. Sometimes, I don't know, with privacy issues, if you call on the phone, is somebody going to talk about your case over the phone? May or may not, I guess, depending on whether they know with certainty it's you, if it's somebody you know. So I think there are a lot of considerations there. The canonical rules are, of course, the same all over the Catholic world. There may be some canonical differences with the Eastern churches. They have their own code of canon law, so wording or whatever. But the basic principles are based on the doctrine of the sacrament of marriage, so you can't deviate too far from certain general principles. The church fiddles with that. It learns more about human psychology, for example, so it takes into account the psychological factor with regard to the maturity of the individual who gets married. That's a big factor, I think, today. Jokingly, I've heard priests say, well, in American society, there's a questionable maturity, especially in males, till they're about 35,
I can vouch for that.
And I think we have that experience with people when we were younger, because we're well beyond 35 now, but even so. But the principles are there, that the couple both knew what the church's teaching was, or rather they knew at least what nature's teaching is, what marriage is for, indissoluble, unitive, and procreative, and that knowing that they fraudulently, as it were, made that marriage, or they lacked some psychological condition, or they had a certain force and fear, like in a shotgun marriage with a 18-year-old girl or something like that. So they're the pretty standardized things, and that's what they necessarily are going to look at. And so I think the biggest problem is workload, and Pope Francis, of course, tried to make that a little easier in the more patent cases, those that were more transparently simple. And so he had his motu proprio on simplifying that. They reduced some of the other ponderous processes that extended it for a very long time. But there's a shortage. There's still, it's a considerably careful process. And I don't know when you would have started on the process, but, if it's just upon entering RCIA, then, it's quite conceivable that it's not going to be done in a 1-year time frame.
Right.
So, this is something I think talked through with the priest who's guiding you into the church, and to see what makes the most sense in terms of proceeding ahead. But local differences maybe in staffing or in the precise forms that are used, but I don't know that there would be any real canonical differences of anything significant across the spectrum of the Latin Church.
Sue, we hope that's helpful for you, and thank you so much for your call. That opens up a line for you now. 833-288-EWTN is our number. 833-288-3986. Quick text here from Amber. Is it possible to be pro-choice and Catholic at the same time?
Speaking as a moral theologian only.
Yes, sir.
Not as a member of the hierarchy or even the priesthood, but as a moral theologian, it is a complete and total contradiction. Complete and total. To say that you are for life, that as a Catholic you believe life starts at conception, or fertilization, if you wish to use a biological term, to avoid double speak on the word conception. and then say, but it's all right for my neighbor to choose it, or it's all right for her to choose it. I'm not going to say anything. You know, history gives us, and I don't need to even detail it because they will all come to your mind immediately, the cases were treated with less than human dignity, and the evils that were perpetrated in various societies, at various places, in various times in our own living memory, that shows the contradiction of being Catholic and being pro-choice, or being Catholic and fill in the blank.
Yeah.
With other examples where life was treated as something to be bought and sold, or to be set aside for the convenience of a person, the person setting them aside. So I think there is a profound moral issue, confessional issue of conscience and conversion going on and should go on. Now, over the decades, various people, I can think of Father Robert Drinan, a Jesuit in the 60s and 70s, who for a while was in Congress and was advising some notable Catholics in Congress, that were sophistries to say how, you know, in a society where you don't want to have a sectarian society, that it's a Catholic government or Protestant government or Jewish government or Islamic government. And in those situations, you can't impinge upon the freedom of others. Well, if you can't say when life begins, which is so scientifically obvious, what happens next? You can't say when life ends, and therefore, if you take it a little bit early, that's all right, too. And by gosh, what's happening in our country right now?
Let's throw a little more grease on that slippery slope, shall we?
Yeah, that slippery slope, and we're going to get it in there.
Oh,
and then the latest thing, the bills in some states where essentially the right of choice, you know, can be like the decision made at the very last moment, that before you start to take a breath. I mean, a degree of incivility that most European ancestors practiced through infanticide long ago before they were evangelized, which the Romans practiced because they would put the pater familias would put the children not wanted on the streets to die in the cold and so on. We're getting there. And this is happening in some places. You hear about children being born and set aside to die without any kind of care. And parents begging hospitals, begging them to at least pain medicine, to give nutrition and hydration. If they're going to die because of some critical injury or incurred as an embryo, as a fetus or whatever, then if they're going to die of that or some congenital genetic failure or fault, then let them die with dignity. But no, they're forced to die with no dignity, even though they are born. So pro-choice embraces that because it's a logical thing that follows from the decision that the right of a person to terminate a life exceeds the right of the life of the person terminated. That's what's being said. So I hope if there are pro-choice Catholics, you can be as mad as you want at me, but you can't be as mad as God will be at you if you don't convert your hearts.
Colin, I wish you had a real opinion about this instead of just being so
just
wishy-washy.
Ask me again later in the show, and maybe I'll give one.
Maybe so. Amber, you asked, and we told you. There you are. Thank you so much for your text. We do appreciate it. This is EWTN's Open Line Friday. Our phone number, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Quick one here before we go to break. This is a text from Jerry. God had Noah load clean and unclean animals onto the ark. So what are unclean animals? What are we talking about here?
Well, we're talking about, for instance, filter feeders in the water because they're filtering detritus, so shellfish.
Oh, really?
Example. Yeah. And the other would be on land animals who do something similar to that. So it has to do with the kinds of things that they were eating and so on. So what is amazing is that in many ways there's a medical soundness to all of that, given to Moses 1,300 years before Christ.
Interesting.
It is, and that's how God works. But it was for the discipline of the Jewish people, from whom was to come the Messiah, that they could learn to obey God in the little things, that they would obey Him in the greater. And I think that that's, of course, no longer obliged on us, and we have this sanitary, keeping such things sanitary and all of that. But that's the basic understanding that I have, is that it has to do with the kinds of foods and things, like the pig. We know the pigs
Sure.
like to eat.
Yes. Okay. Got it. And we appreciate your question as well, Jerry. Thank you so much for it. In a moment here, we'll get with Marilyn, very patiently waiting in Fort Wayne, Indiana. We've got lots more phone calls to get to at 833-288-EWTN, 833-288-3986. Looks like 3 lines are open right now here on EWTN's Open Line Friday with Colin Donovan. Do stay with us. Hey, it's Open Line Friday in progress here on EWTN Radio. Our phone number 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986 if you have a question for Colin Donovan. Back to the phones right now. Here is Marilyn in Fort Wayne listening on the great Redeemer Radio. Hey, Marilyn, happy Friday to you. What's on your mind today?
I have a question about what happens to prayers after we die. Let's say, suppose we give somebody prayers who did not die in a state of grace. Mm-hmm. Obviously, they're in the worst place possible. What happens to those prayers? I mean,
Sure.
Where do they go? I mean, if somebody's already condemned. Why, how do we know? The other question I have is, I read somewhere, and gosh, I wish I had written this down, on the final judgment day, when Jesus returns and separates us out into those who are saved, those who go to the eternal damnation. Somebody had said that the souls in purgatory may still have to do some time in purgatory. I thought once the end of the world was the end of the world, everybody went to their designated places.
You are correct. It's as simple as that.
I will let you go, and I'll listen to your response.
Okay, sure.
Thanks.
Yeah, now what you stated there at the end, if you were not able to hear me, maybe for whatever reason, is that is correct, and that is that at the Last Judgment, which is a sort of a review of all of history, including all of the judgment decisions God made with regard to souls, so that everyone knows everything essentially, Don't ask me how that'll work, but he's God. He'll make it work.
Yes.
Yes, we're going to be in one of two places. We'll be in the new heavens and the new earth, which means that we will be in the renewed creation, and we'll have the intellectual vision of God, which is the state of being in the presence of God and seeing God as he is, face to face, as St. Paul puts it. So, and the others will be in a place of eternal punishment created for the devil and his angels, as we're told in the Scriptures. So purgatory will be emptied out. Their bodies will rise when ours rise, when those who are already in heaven rise, when the bodies of the damned join with them. And we in our entirety, body and soul, will go to our place of reward or punishment. Prior to that, when we make prayers, it's interesting you should ask that question. I was chatting a little bit with Brother David there before the show here, David Anders. He just done his show, and I was coming in to do mine. We were chatting about that, and there's a good point to be made here, and that is that really, we can't ultimately know where our prayers go. If you think about it, we make an honest prayer for an individual. We pray for them. We don't know their fate. We don't know if they're in heaven, which they don't need them. If they're in hell, they definitely don't need them. And if they're in purgatory, they need them. But God knows that. So what we do has merit before God, because it's a good work, and it's done in Christ, in grace, and therefore it has value before God. But maybe where we say we want it for, we name somebody in our prayer who can't benefit from it, because they're in heaven or in the other place. God can still use the value of that prayer. And so I think we can trust to his wisdom. If there is a soul, maybe even one of your relatives, if you're praying for your relatives or your ancestors or something like that God will apply that. If we think about it, it's a weighing of the justice of your intention, which I think he would respect, but also the practical thing that, this can't benefit that person because they're in heaven or they're in hell. So I think God, we can trust to God's wisdom that he is listening. He is listening to the value of what we're all asking of him. It has value before him. He may not be able to answer it the way you want because of that circumstance. The person doesn't need it any longer for either reason. But that he will find it within the communion of the saints. He will find a place for that value to assist in the purification, the speedier purification of souls. So we can safely leave those kinds of great decisions to him.
I love the phrase, no prayer is ever wasted.
No, there is not wasted. It's not like, that was a waste of time.
Yeah.
No. If we pray, if we are acting Christ-like by praying for souls, then the Father is going to look at that Christ-like act and be pleased. And if he's pleased, he will be attentive to what you've requested.
Sounds like a good place to leave it. Marilyn, thank you so much for your call. This is Open Line Friday here on EWTN. Our phone number 833-288-EWTN. Here now is Mary, and Mary is listening to us. Mary, what's on your mind today?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. I am an RCIA director, and last night at RCIA we discussed marriage, and one of the candidates and his spouse was his sponsor, said that he feels the church is unfair when it comes to gay marriage, and he gave a lot of reasons. We talked with him about it, but if he stays with this conviction, do I still let him enter the church at Easter?
Well, I think that's ultimately up to the pastor. If I were the pastor, I would say that there's no question of the infallibility of the church's teaching on marriage by reason of the ordinary magisterium. In other words, it's a truth of the faith. It involves moral truths of the faith, including the licitness of homosexual acts, and so on and so forth, as well as the very nature of marriage. So I would say this is an obstacle to him being received as a Catholic, but I can't speak for whether The bishop or the clergy generally think that. But if you look at it from the point of view that, well, if you're embracing the faith, but you have a reservation, can you receive baptism, for example? Could you receive it validly? I could make a case both ways. But the case against would be this. St. Thomas says that if we accept one thing, if the church says there are 100 things that you have to believe to be a Catholic, and we say, I accept 99, but I can't accept this one over here, whatever point might be a graver point of the, that Christ is, one person, two natures with one person. But on this point of the gay marriage as well, if you say, I accept this one over here, it's necessarily true that you accept the other 99 because I don't have any problem with those. Not God is taught, but I don't have any problem with those. This one over here, God also teaches, but I have a problem with that one. So the logic of it would be, I don't know whether baptism would be valid or confirmation would be valid. But you might say from the moral point of view, the person who goes through that in a way is acting somewhat falsely, without integrity. The integrity would be, I'm not ready. Yeah, maybe I'll one day be convinced that what the church teaches is true, but I'm not ready. I think that would be the integral approach. And the other thing would be that morally, if they can't possess theological faith because they possess the teachings of the church by reason of natural reason, I agree with it or I don't, or it's logical to me or it isn't, or whatever. I would say rather this: in the time remaining for Lent, he should pray, and he should pray this prayer, which I think Newman and others recommend, and that is that you pray that I don't understand why the church teaches this, but your church teaches it, Lord. Grant me to the grace not to know. We're never going to know whether from natural reason, the Trinity, for example. Grant me the grace to believe. But I think if somebody is going up to be baptized or confirmed or receive fully into the church with the idea that they're the judge of what they will believe and not believe, they're setting themselves up for an even greater sin than not entering the church. The honesty of not entering the church in that situation is that God could still work for them. They're seeking the truth. They're not quite there. The dishonesty is that they go in thinking a wrong idea of the nature of Catholic faith, that it's about what I think is the truth, and not about what, as the active faith says, I believe these and all the truth which Catholic Church teaches, because you, referring to God, can neither deceive nor be deceived. And that's the basis on which we should make an active faith. And being received requires an active faith. It's in the ceremonial. So I'm not sure how they do, but I would say the approach is to pray and to ask God for the faith to accept it, and to explain as best to him that this is not something the church can change, that the nature of man and woman as what the sexual act is for is not going to change by a vote of the bishops, for example, much less a vote of the faithful. Because the church serves the doctrine of Christ. The doctrine of Christ serves the church by making sure that it's faithfully conveyed. And so that's the obligation of the church. So I think ask him to pray. Ask him to ask for the faith in an area he cannot understand. Ask him, the Lord, to dispose him to receive this. And if in goodwill he could say, yes, I think I can accept this. Doesn't mean I'm not doubting maybe this, that, but not that he's rejecting. I think Get them beyond rejecting if you're able to.
Great advice there from Colin Donovan. Mary, thank you so much for your call here on EWTN's Open Line Friday. Let's move on here to Leandra, very patiently waiting in Grand Rapids, listening to Holy Family Radio. Hey, Leandra, what's on your mind today?
Hi. I have a question regarding relics.
Mm-hmm.
As a convert, I just converted in the last 8 years, so they're still fairly mysterious to me, and I'm just not sure how our Catholic Church teaching can talk about needing to, be buried and, not cremated, and, all the whole body needs to remain in one, spot. But then how do we where's the church teaching on relics that, if a person is, deemed incorruptible, that we can break apart their body or, put a vial of blood in a church. And so that's where I'm confused where I can find that church teaching, because we still have Protestant friends, too, that I've just not been able to explain that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there's a great difference there. With relics, which are in sacred scripture, think of some of them would be clothing and not necessarily the body, but if you think of the relic of Elijah's cloak, which when passed to Elisha still opened the Jordan up. You think of St. Paul's handkerchief, which cured the sick. So God wills that these things manifest the holiness which the person, through his divine life in them and acting through them and by their correspondence with grace offered, that holiness have these kinds of palpable results. The Church has a very strong belief in the importance of matter. We're not angels, and we're not animals. So we're spiritualized animals, or animalized spirits, you might say, but we're body and soul in any case. And so the material things are as important to us as the spiritual things. Now, when a relic is retrieved, the Church, what does the Church do? Takes tremendous care, first, that it's authentically treated and not with any kind of superstition or sentimentality, that it's venerated in a church. And that's one thing, is it's generally venerated in some remarkable way in the church. Of course, we know the stories from the catacombs that the Mass was celebrated in the catacombs, not necessarily directly over the graves of the martyrs, but among those Christians who had died, although there were probably cases where actually over the graves of the martyrs, from which came the practice that relics should be in proximity to the altar. Sometime in the old way, practice was if it was a marble altar, a marble piece with a lid, and you open up the relics, went in, the lid was sealed up. And in this way, that again, imitating the practice of the early church, the Mass celebrated there. And so it's an invocation of the intercession of those martyrs, and particularly if the church is named after the martyrs or the apostles or the saints or whomever, that some relic of that individual is there. This is quite different than sort of the sentimental ideas of, let's, mom and dad, let's cremate them, and then we'll divide them up and everybody will have their own little jar of mom and dad.
Yeah.
The Church has another idea, and that is that at least where the person has not been canonized or even beatified, typically a person is beatified, they recover the body, and at that point the Church takes custody of that for the purposes of relics and treats it in accordance with its tradition on that. But it's quite different from sort of the familial idea that, well, we'll cremate relatives and then we'll, on the mantle. Obviously, you could keep a relative in an honorable place in the house, but the idea is to, to be in a place, for example, used to be most parishes had parish cemeteries. Of course, that's not true in our big cities. It may be true in some rural parishes still. And so the Mass would be offered in proximity to the deceased as well in those contexts. Today, the practice of the columbarium next to the as we have at the Cathedral of St. Paul.
Yes.
And Mass can be offered there for the repose of the souls. And so the Church has these practices and does it in a very particular way that respects the sacredness of the body. But then to the scattering on the mountain or on the water or in the meadow or wherever it is they like to go, or keeping them on the mantle, does not rise to that level of respect.
Right.
You know, so the basic principle is the same. Now, the Church does not oppose cremation per se. You can imagine during the Black Plague in the Middle Ages, many bodies were cremated because they didn't know about microbes and they didn't know how disease was transmitted, but they knew that you could touch one of these diseased bodies and come up with bubonic plague. So they did the comment, well, let's burn them. And so it's clear that in epidemics, the incineration of human remains is for the good of the whole community. And the good of the community rises above the good of the individual, and so that practice. So there's usually a very clear and logical and reasonable assessment of each of the situations where the Church says, this is okay, this is not. And today, cremation is generally going to be licit, with the sole exception of when it's done in contempt of the doctrine of the resurrection. For a person to make a statement, why such a person would get a Catholic funeral, be buried in the Catholic Church, I don't know. But if they were to, for the sake of their children, be cremated, but they don't really believe in the resurrection, then that would not be a good motive, and the Church would not allow it if it knows that that's behind the request.
We do appreciate your call, Leandra. Thank you so much for it. This is EWTN's Open Line Friday with Colin Donovan here on the radio. A couple of quick things before we get back to the phones. First of all, for a previous caller that we had, you may want to check out a brand new book now on sale at EWTN's religious catalog, and it's called A Bridge of Mercy: Homosexuality and God's Merciful Love. And that's written by Dr. Robert Stackpole. He was on EWTN Live last week. Yeah. Very good book. Do check that out, EWTNRC.com. The other thing I wanted to mention, if you missed part or all of our show this week, last week, whenever, you could listen again by going to your EWTN app that is right there on your phone, your tablet, mobile device, whatever. Check it out by going to EWTNapps.com, EWTNapps.com. You can download the app. It's a great thing. Got it on my phone. I'm going to put money on the fact that Colin probably has it on his phone as well.
You bet I do.
I figured you would.
And on my TV at home as well.
Good man. All right. Back to the phones now. Here is Mayra in Fort Worth, listening on Guadalupe Radio. Mayra, what is on your name? What's on your mind today?
Yes, my question is regarding communion. What can we do to differentiate between a mortal sin and a venial sin? Because sometimes I'm not sure, and then I received communion, and then I thought, oh man, did I just commit another sin because it probably was a mortal sin?
Well, this is sort of the circular thinking that Catholics can easily fall into, and you have to be careful about it. A general principle is, unless you're trying to look the truth in the face and wink at it, in other words, to get away with something, if you didn't know it was a mortal sin when you did it, you didn't commit a mortal sin. Because you need knowledge, you need freedom of will. So without the knowledge that something is a mortal sin, and most people, I think, if they do a good examination of conscience, one of the reasons the Church recommends a daily examination of conscience is, if you're only going to confession every month or 2 or 6 or whatever it is, who's to say you're going to remember something you did in January when July rolls around?
Yeah.
So, of course, the Easter duty comes in there too, but that's another matter. So it's good to, from time to time, whether daily or even a couple times a week, think about how your week has gone and see where you might have fallen short. But ultimately, if you don't think you offended God in something that was of serious matter, and you're not trying to kid yourself or be ignorant of the truth, it's very unlikely that you committed a mortal sin. I'd say it's next to impossible, and that's a good that's a good standard to use. Now, as Catholics, we come to know more and more about the faith. You watch EWTN, listen to EWTN. It's very easy, to get the first-year med student problem of everything they study. How my lymph glands, what, am I getting that disease,
Oh, yeah.
So it's very easy when you're learning about the faith or you're intensely interested in what the church teaches to start contemplating maybe with too much attention the minutia and not look at the bigger issue, and that is, when I did that, I was tired or I was weak or I didn't think about it or whatever. I wasn't trying to offend God. I didn't know any different, or a moment of weakness or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's not going to be mortal sin. So that's a good rule to keep in mind.
Okay, appreciate your call, Mayra. Thank you so much for it. This is EWTN's Open Line Friday with Colin Donovan. Let's go back to Peter in Mansfield, Ohio right now, listening on Annunciation Radio. Peter, what's on your mind today?
Hi there. I just wanted to know if you could explain how free will works when God has, omnipotence, and how if He can, see the future, or so to say, how are we then, not predestined, and so on and so forth.
I'm sure you can explain free will in 2 minutes.
Yeah. Well, we are predestined because God takes His knowledge of what we'll do into account. And sure, He could offer a grace that would lead the person to lead the life that he desires. So there are some mysteries in that, but yet on the other hand, the church says that both God is all-knowing and all-powerful, but He giving us freedom. He won't coerce our wills. He will tug on them. He will encourage them. He may send people who will bring to our attention what we're doing wrong. Providentially, He may do many things, and by the actual graces He offers, encourage us to convert. But He won't step into our will and bend it, and that's the thing. So you could say that God's omnipotence falls short on a couple points, and that is, He can't know anything but truth, and He can't do anything but good. And He won't force us to believe regarding truth, and He won't force our will to do the good if we are unalterably opposed to doing it. But He will find the chinks in the armor and the cracks, and He'll work on us until we freely say, I surrender, Lord.
Yeah.
I want what You want.
That's what I want. Peter, thank you so much for your call. One last question here from Zena in Massachusetts. She wants to know, why do nuns wear habits?
Well, it comes from the general in the early church to set themselves apart. They had the widows. They had mostly the monks in those days, and they wore usually black or white clothing. Those are the two predominant colors. And the idea was a reference to the angelic life where everything was uniformly good. And so this has become the practice of communities of religious men and women down through the years, of having a distinctive garb that not only reflects that sort of anticipation of heavenly life, but also some particular characteristic of their charism.
Tremendous witness, isn't it, though?
It really is.
If you're in an airport, you see a nun go by or a priest, you think, these people have given their lives.
And the contrary is also true if they're not in habit.
Well, yes, indeed. Hey, Colin Donovan, thank you so much. We hope you have a wonderful weekend.
I thank you, and you as well.
Thank you. And don't forget, if you missed part of today's program, we will encore tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern right here on EWTN. On behalf of Michael McCall, Ryan Penny, and Jeff Burson, I'm Tom Price. Have a great weekend. See you next time. God bless.